I really have to walk on eggshells in this one because here's where I'm going to get myself in trouble. The topic we're going to be discussing, because it's a topic that's going to come up, is Omicron. Every town council meeting, Dr. Jeremy Levin is on the agenda to present on the COVID updates. And Health Department Director Morrissey is often on there too. This is definitely going to come up. This has been the news of the world. This has been the major talking point of the last week. It's going to come up. So when they do come up, the reason I want to talk about this, and I have to be really careful because YouTube and Facebook have editorial guidelines. So there's not so much that I can say about this. This is going to be the shortest part of this entire show tonight. Councilmen, ask about outcomes. Ask about outcomes. When it comes to all things, ask about outcomes. I know why we're using I know why the conversation has been nothing but transmission. We've talked about this in the past. I'm not here to talk about that. And I talked about when Ms. Morrissey said we are focusing too much on outcomes. We're focusing too much on deaths. Of course, we care about deaths more than anything else. In brief, because it's death. Because it's death. Not only is that like the goalpost, right? There's nothing beyond that goalpost. Not only does that provide a good goalpost, not only, of course, do other adverse outcomes tend to necessarily scale with death, like it's death. Of course, this is the thing we care most about. If we have a little sniffle, not that big a deal. If we're talking about deaths, then we're talking about deaths. This is where our area of concern with. So, of course, we're going to care about outcomes. And of course, the outcome we care most about is death. So, councilmen, when we have this conversation about Omicron, which you know is coming up, have this conversation, ask about outcomes. That's what we care about. And if you have to be combative, use HPV as an example. HPV has run absolutely roughshod over our college campuses. Mike Nahum has kids in college right now. They're going to get HPV. We're going to get it. Like it's just an accepted inevitability in college. Mike Nahum, at least one of your two kids is going to catch HPV at some point, right? Why aren't we burning down the entire post-secondary education institution here in this country? Why aren't we doing that? No, it's because nobody, and I mean nobody, dies from HPV. Nobody. It's incredibly easy to treat, just as much as it's incredibly easy to vaccinate against COVID. And you wind up with these outcome rates that are incredibly low. And again, I can't talk too much more about this. So when it comes to Omicron, let's let the people that know more than anyone else about Omicron, let's let them have that conversation. In fact, let's talk about Dr. I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, Angelike Coetzee. Oh my God, that was awful. Coetzee, yeah. What has she said about the symptoms and outcomes? This is Dr. Angelique Coetzee. She's the doctor that discovered Omicron, and she's made her rounds. So what has she said? Cue 3-minute montage from our doctor whose name I can't pronounce.
The Omicron patients, what don't they have? They don't have loss of smell, loss of taste, a very stuffy nose, a terrible cough, and at this stage, we don't see them or either with having oxygen problems. We call it the SATS monitor. We don't see that now. But in these cases, they would describe the throat as a bit scratchy. I have not got one that says to me, I've got a severe sore throat. The ones that did come in with a sore throat was not positive. So we ruled that out. It's also the cough. The cough is a very, very mild, dry cough. It's more like an irritation, and it's not there the whole time. So they don't even focusing on the cough. For them, it's more the malaise. They're not feeling well, the body aches and pain and the headache, and the tiredness, the fatigue. The overall patients that was recorded yesterday was 3,000 and around about 3,700. So our positivity rate is 9.2%. It is more than we would have loved it to be. But looking at the mildness of the symptoms that we are seeing, currently there's no reason for panicking, as we don't see severely ill patients. So what we see with this one is, again, it started, normally it will always start with your younger people. So it started with the younger generation, 40 and less. And the most predominant clinical complaint is severe fatigue for 1 or 2 days, with then the headache and the body aches and pain. Some of them will have what they call a scratchy throat, and some will have a cough, a dry cough, but it's not a constant cough. It comes and goes. And that's more or less the big symptoms that we have seen. And this is not anecdotal. This is the clinical picture, not only seen by me, but by other family practitioners in the Gauteng region, is that most of these cases are mild, whether you're vaccinated or not. And yes, we did see or do see vaccinations, people who that had been vaccinated with breakthrough infections. Again, mild disease. There is no increase in our hospital admissions currently, not in the private sector and not in the public sector. Those admissions that are seen are easily being treated and handled in the ICU. I know of one patient being ventilated in one of the Pretoria hospitals. Again, we're not sure whether it's Omicron or Delta variant. For now, there's no reason for panic.
So, should we panic then? Should we freak out? Should we freak out? What did she say about whether or not we should freak out? And by the way, she's not the only one saying this. Like this isn't me just like cherry picking the one lady who said this one thing. Oh, though she is the person who discovered it. And yes, I'm going to try this one last time to get her name right. Dr. Angelike Kutze. Kutze, because it's Dutch. There's an umlaut over the E, so it's Kutze. So, we've seen what she said. Let's see what another doctor says who has loads of experience in the medical field. Let's see what Dr. John Campbell has to say. Now, by the way, Dr. John Campbell put this presentation that's like 25 minutes long. I'll put a link in the comments section here. Excuse me while I put this link into the comments section here. Here it is for Facebook. Here it is for YouTube. You guys, if you want to, you can go to that video and watch the whole thing. And watch the whole thing there. I'm going to give you guys just about a 3.5 minute intro clip of what he said about Omicron that I'm hoping we'll all pay attention to here. Let's see what he said. Should we be freaking out?
So the summary of this situation here is there's been an examination of 166 patients admitted with COVID, or not admitted with COVID, but found to have COVID in hospital in South Africa since the Omicron variant arrived. And there's also data from a snapshot of 42 patients on the COVID wards in the Steve Biko Hospital in Pretoria in South Africa. This is the absolute epicenter of where this started. So this is really the sentinel information we're getting here. What is happening here? What is happening here in South Africa will be happening all around the world in 6, 7, 8, 9 weeks. Time, that kind of time frame. So this is an anticipation of what's going to happen everywhere. The proviso is that as we said yesterday, there's quite a lot of HIV in South Africa, but I think this data is looking good. And in fact, if anything, the data looks better because of the HIV in South Africa, strangely enough. So it's these two things: 166 patients and a snapshot of 42 patients on the COVID wards at Steve Biko Hospital. The majority of hospital admissions are for diagnoses unrelated to COVID-19. So most of the patients in hospital with COVID-19 were diagnosed for something different. They were just picked up. The SARS coronavirus 2 positivity is an incidental finding in these patients and is largely driven by hospital policy requiring testing of all admitted patients to be tested, of course, because you need to know if they're going to spread it to everyone else. So they've found a lot of people who were admitted for other medical reasons who, hey, they seem to have SARS coronavirus 2 as well. 76% of the patients are incidental COVID admissions. So 76% of the patients with COVID were just found to have COVID in hospital. They weren't admitted for COVID-related complications. This is really very reassuring news. And the South African authorities are saying this is a very unusual picture, and it's also occurring at other hospitals in the Gauteng region, which is again the region where this all started in South Africa, even though it probably came from Botswana. The high proportion of COVID incidental admissions may reflect higher rates of community transmission compared to previous waves. Now, I haven't got full data on this, but I've been looking at this morning. And the sewage surveillance in South Africa, the prevalence of new infection has just gone off the scale. It just seems to be absolutely huge. This Omicron variant is just completely, exponentially taken off in South Africa and in most provinces now. It's absolutely huge number of community incidents. Now, the good point about this, of course, is that means we're going to get massive herd immunity really quickly. And that's why this is so, one of the reasons this is so encouraging. But anyway, getting back to the direct communication from the South African authorities. So it's absolutely taken off. May reflect higher rates of community transmission compared to previous variants. So the first three waves, it wasn't as fast as this. This was absolutely taken off. There's massive transmissibility of Omicron. But that's not translating into higher admission rates for a primary COVID-19 diagnosis. This is just brilliant news. So there you go. That's the main points of today's talk. If you're short of time.
So, what have we learned here? Pretty much that everything we already know was true. As time goes on, transmission goes up, death rates go down. As the variants that we're going to get as time goes on become significantly less severe over time, because it's obviously not in the virus's interest long term to kill its hosts. Symptoms become milder and milder. This is what's been implied by Dr. Coetzee, and it's what's been implied by Dr. John Campbell here. And again, is news we should be taking to our town council meetings. What's implied from what Dr. John Campbell has said is that Omicron has a chance to completely take over the other variants. This is good. This is good because the outcomes are extremely, extremely mild. And if the outcomes are extremely mild, who cares? Then everyone can develop natural immunity and we move on, right? If this is something that is just part of the air, right? If this thing is as mild as everything's been implied so far, and it looks to be the case, and it would logically predict to be the case, then what you would want to do is have this just everywhere, because that means that if the symptoms are going to be mild, then even the unvaccinated can just go ahead and get it and then have a naturally built, I can't use that phrase because we're on Facebook and on YouTube, have a immunity built up by virtue of having that exposure, right? And then we can just move on. And like a whole host of other diseases we built immunity to over the length of human history, it'll just be out there in ether. In fact, when it comes to things like E. coli, there's a partly symbiotic relationship to a certain extent. Now, I realize E. coli is not a virus, but the point is the same. If it's just in the air that we breathe and not harmful, who cares? Who cares? And this is a question, again, we should be taking to town council meetings. If it's in the air, if it's just out there in the air that we breathe and it's not harmful, who cares? If it's like nitrogen in the air, which if we overexpose ourselves to, kills us, right? This is the Benz, nitrogen poisoning, right? If it's just like nitrogen, then who cares? It is not the role of government to conduct risk calculations for the individuals where the individual can reasonably make those risk calculations themselves. Remember, we're all harkening back to the limited view of government versus the unlimited view of government. By the way, it should be said, of course, that zero COVID is an actual impossibility, but it shouldn't be the goal anyways. And don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise on this matter, right? Like, zero COVID, even if it was possible, is a risk threshold that should be for you and me to decide. That should be for the individual where they reasonably can to make that decision, and we reasonably can at this point, especially if the outcomes are non-existent or are the sniffles. Like, who cares about the sniffles? Who cares? Well, why are we destroying the economy? Death by starvation is still death. So why are we destroying our economy and destroying our lives for a sniffle if that's what we're looking at here? These risk calculations are for you and me are a decision for you and me to make. You devolve these calculations. For your own good is for you to decide. Your own good is for you to decide. Otherwise, you end up getting... for your own good is for you to decide. Otherwise, you end up getting Australian concentration camps for your own good.